I was born in a country without abundant natural resources, so I used to envy places where just digging into the ground would reveal an abundance of oil, zinc, copper, lithium, iron ore, or diamonds. But now, few economists consider rich natural resources essential for economic development. The best examples are Japan and South Korea, and in Europe, Germany. Nowadays, it's said that countries with abundant resources tend to experience slower economic growth and more poverty. This is what's called the resource curse, a term first coined by British economist Richard Oddie. Until the late 18th century, when the Industrial Revolution took place, resources weren't very crucial to the economy. Back then, the most valuable asset was fertile land, where you could farm easily. However, when iron and coal began driving the Industrial Revolution, the importance of natural resources became much more significant. It then became common sense to think that the more resources a country had, the better off it would be compared to those that didn't have as much. In reality, that's not what happened. Venezuela, the country with the most black gold or oil in the world, even refers to it as the devil's excrement. In Sierra Leone, Africa, known for its 1,000-carat diamonds, 43% of the population lives on less than $2 a day. At first glance, it seems counterintuitive that resources might not only fail to aid economic development, but even hinder it. You might wonder, surely countries rich in resources have an advantage over those that are resource poor, where they don't even have this to fall back on, right? In this video, let's discuss how an excess of resources can ruin a country. First, resources often bring the risk of conflict or, in severe cases, civil war. This is arguably the worst aspect of the resource curse. According to a study by the World Bank, the likelihood of civil war in countries without natural resources is 0.5%. However, in countries where the economy depends heavily on a specific resource, this risk rises to 23%. That's a difference of 46 times. Natural resources are generally not spread evenly across a country. They tend to be concentrated in specific areas. This leads to a wealth disparity between Region A, which has resources, and Region B, which does not. Region B, discontented, demands a share of the wealth, but Region A has no intention of sharing. This is how internal conflicts start. Countries with many resources typically have multiple ethnic groups or tribes. They may have long-standing hostilities, and their religions could differ. A minor dispute among these groups can quickly escalate into civil war, with some even pushing for complete secession. This is why countries with abundant resources like Congo, Sudan, and Nigeria frequently experience civil wars. Such conflicts often become endless cycles of tribal retaliation, reinforcing the term curse. Even if civil war, the worst-case scenario, doesn't occur, avoiding dictatorship and corruption becomes difficult. To prevent internal unrest, resource-rich countries typically establish a highly centralized government. As a result, the vast profits from resource extraction tend to concentrate among a select privileged few. To protect these privileges, the government becomes more violent and authoritarian, creating a cycle of escalating repression. Myanmar is another country in Asia that fits this description. It's known for both Buddhism and rubies. 90% of the world's rubies come from Myanmar, and these gems have been a source of revenue for the military government that has controlled the country for decades. All the gemstone mines are owned by companies created by the military government. The reason why African and Central Asian countries rich in resources often have long-standing dictators is quite similar. However, the wealth from these resources is so enticing that someone is always challenging this iron-fisted rule. That's why long-term dictatorships and coups are so common. In Guinea, where coups have occurred frequently until recently, the struggle has ultimately been about controlling bauxite, the raw material for aluminum. Amid this ongoing political instability, it's impossible to create sound economic policies, leading most of the population to suffer from extreme poverty even more than those in resource-poor countries. 70% of the population in Guinea lives in poverty. When wealth and power concentrate among a few, corruption follows. In such countries, those in power care little about the economy, and businesses can't operate without paying bribes. Companies find it more profitable to secure cheap resources through kickbacks than to invest in technology. So the collusion between business and government becomes a chronic issue. Sometimes neighboring countries seek to control these resources, forming alliances with corrupt and anti-government factions. About 30 years ago, Liberia in West Africa supported the Sierra Leonean rebel army to incite civil war, gaining significant profits from Sierra Leone's diamonds. Even if a country manages to avoid conflicts, civil wars, dictatorships, and corruption, The resource curse can persist because it also has adverse economic impacts. Rich resources can distort industrial structures. If a country relies heavily on underground resources for most of its production, other industries like manufacturing or services lag, reducing national competitiveness. It's like if you can just dig for a living, there's no need to invest effort into developing other fields. These countries then use the money from resource sales to import consumer and production goods from abroad, leading to the decline of manufacturing and ultimately leaving only mining. As more people flock to mining for jobs, labor costs drop, and everyone but a select few falls into poverty. Due to the nature of resource industries, they mainly generate low-skilled workers, making it increasingly challenging to expect growth in other industries. Resource prices are highly volatile as they are determined by international markets, not individual countries. This makes it hard to plan a stable economy when a nation's economy depends on resources. If you predict a prolonged boom and overinvest only to have resource prices suddenly plummet, it can lead to a surge in external debt. That's why many Latin American countries often experience economic roller coasters. Many Latin American countries have more than 70% of their exports from natural resources. And when resources are depleted, the economy can quickly collapse. An extreme example is the small island nation of Nauru in the South Pacific. Nauru sold phosphates, a fertilizer raw material, and in the 1980s, its per capita income surpassed that of Japan and the United States. The phosphates that turned Nauru into a lottery-winning island nation ran out in just over a decade, leading to its ruin. Nauru now barely survives by receiving aid from Australia in exchange for housing refugees. It's a dismal situation. Another aspect of the resource curse is currency value. When you sell resources and get a lot of dollars, your currency can appreciate rapidly. For example, if the Japanese yen used to be 150 yen to the dollar, it could suddenly become 100 yen to the dollar. This would lead to a significant loss of export competitiveness in all industries except for the resource sector. This curse doesn't just happen to developing countries, it can occur in developed ones too. A notable example is the Netherlands in the 1960s. The Netherlands suddenly discovered a massive natural gas deposit off its coast. Naturally, it earned a lot from exports, and the whole country was in a celebratory mood. However, the unexpected happened when the flood of dollars caused the currency to appreciate, leading to a severe decline in the competitiveness of all manufacturing industries except natural gas. This resulted in a prolonged economic slump for the Netherlands. What seemed like a jackpot with natural gas was actually a resource curse. This peculiar phenomenon in advanced countries is called the Dutch disease in the economic world. However, not everyone suffers from the resource curse. There are exceptions like the Netherlands, which I just mentioned. Although the Netherlands faced a temporary economic downturn, it didn't experience coups or civil wars. It took some time, but the Netherlands eventually found a solution by investing the profits from natural gas into technology development and infrastructure, pulling itself out of crisis. Unlike developing countries, the Netherlands already had a fair decision-making structure and a range of industries to invest in. About 10 years after the Netherlands, Norway also discovered massive oil fields off its coast. Fortunately, Norway learned from the Netherlands' experience. To prevent a sudden influx of dollars from causing its currency to skyrocket, Norway invested most of it in a sovereign wealth fund and other overseas assets. This wise strategy made Norway one of the wealthiest countries in the world today. It's not only advanced countries that can escape the resource curse. Botswana in Africa, where 80% of exports come from diamonds, is a notable example. Using the diamond profits, Botswana transformed from a nation with a per capita income of $60 in the 1960s to a stable country with a current per capita income of $7,700. The key was to prevent the concentration of diamond profits among a select few, investing in infrastructure and widespread public education. Botswana has also been one of the few African countries to maintain peaceful transitions of power for decades, making it a rare example of democracy on the continent. Angola is another example. After being trapped in the resource curse and suffering decades of civil war, Angola has been stabilizing since the 2000s. 90% of its exports come from oil, so its dependency is significant. However, with successive democratically elected governments, the country has been using this revenue to build hospitals and schools for the public and invest in various social infrastructures like roads. Recently, Angola has been a new beacon of hope in Africa. Thus, the resource curse is not an unsolvable trap for humanity. It's just a matter of how resources are distributed among the majority and how they are utilized. The United States, Canada, and Australia are prime examples. But even though it seems straightforward, many countries still struggle with the resource curse. If there's a curse, it's not in the resources themselves, but rather in the inability of humans to curb selfish desires.